as far as women like Laura Bates are concerned, they're usually people with personality disorders of one sort or another. And I just think that, anything that she can publish, she will publish, as you say, without any sense of responsibility. And certainly in our case, with absolutely no research done. And unfortunately, eventually she'll be exposed as a fraud.
This video is part of a series where I will be fact-checking a number of claims that Laura Bates has made about the men's human rights movement in her book, Men Who Hate Women. And to do this most effectively, I will be taking the time to talk to some of the people that Laura Bates repeatedly talks about in a manner that I would describe as wholly inconsistent with at least 9 of the 12 National Union of Journalists' core principles. And in this video, I talked to Erin Pizzey, who opened the modern world's first refuge for women and children escaping domestic violence in West London in 1971, and is widely considered to be the mother of the worldwide women's refuge movement. Specifically, we discussed Laura Bates's claim that Paul Elam used a fake website designed to promote false facts and to fraudulently acquire public donations intended for victims of domestic abuse. Paul Elam has addressed this allegation in a related video, but it is one that is particularly pertinent to Erin, given that she is in fact the owner of the so-called fake website in question. For the uninitiated, www.whiteribbon.org, which is now known as honestribbon.org, is a website that UK-based Erin Pizzey has used to share her research and interviews and to advocate for a greater awareness of the impact of domestic abuse on all victims regardless of sex. The site is funded and hosted by Paul Elam's A Voice for Men and launched in 2014. It is openly critical of domestic abuse charities that only focus on domestic violence against women, and to promote the perception and gender stereotype that only men are perpetrators of violence in the home. This criticism has included the gender-exclusive approach adopted by a number of different white ribbon campaigns around the world, including a white ribbon campaign registered in Australia. This led to an intellectual property dispute with the Australian-based charity over the domain name, and following a dispute arbitration panel hearing in 2016, the World Intellectual Property Organisation ordered that ownership of the disputed domain name, whiteribbon.org, be transferred to them. This led to the change in name to honestribbon.org, and it is significant to note that while ultimately the arbitration panel found against Pizzey due to the similarity of the domain name, they did not find any evidence of any attempt to solicit donations, and acknowledged that the site displayed a prominent statement clarifying that it was owned by Erin Pizzey and not affiliated with any other white ribbon organisation. The panel also acknowledged that its purpose was non-commercial, to raise awareness and campaign against domestic violence impacting on any person irrespective of sex, and that in essence that Pizzey was using the disputed domain name to critique organisations like White Ribbon Australia and to question the efficacy and motivations of campaigns that focus solely on preventing domestic violence against one sex. All somewhat significant details that the curator and gatekeeper of examples of everyday sexism fails to mention in her book.
Now, I knew there were other white ribbons, like Australia. There was, I think, one in England as well and other places. But because mine was the actual domain name, .org, the others, I didn't really think about it. Now, I didn't have any idea how to run a website or host a website or whatever you do. And Paul said, well, don't worry. We can host it for you and put the stuff on that you want. But it's your website. You do whatever you like with it. And so I was absolutely delighted. And I sorted it out, and I put all my articles up there about my now it's 50 years work with domestic violence. And very simply what I'd always believed, making the case for the generational family violence and dysfunction being the root cause of domestic violence. And there was some absolutely historic moments in there, interviews with people like Murray Strauss. Now, Murray Strauss and I and Richard Geddes and also Susan Steinmetz met each other in about 1974, and they were just beginning to look at research on domestic violence. And we met each other in Rhode Island at the university and had a long discussion. So we actually knew each other, we were friends. And subsequently, Murray's died, but his interview is there. And it's a beautiful interview. He was a gentle, very kind man. And everything I wrote and put up there, I can vouch for.
The aspect of it that I studied was depression and anxiety. And being assaulted by a partner increases the probability of depression and anxiety. Now, it does it for both men and women. Men are attacked by their partners. And remember, we have to go back to just as many men are attacked by their partners as women. Because it's somewhat more harmful to women, doesn't mean it's not harmful to men. Just like physical attacks, women may be injured more often, but lots of men are injured. We don't say, well, the disease B isn't worth studying because disease A is more harmful. We've got to attend to both.
The claims that she makes in the men's rights chapter certainly didn't surprise me. But, kind of having talked to you recently, and I just remember you mentioning just in passing the white ribbon kind of incident of the lawsuit, it then jumped out at me whenever she was claiming that this was something that Paul Elam did and that he was kind of profiting from it. So, so one of her main claims is that the fake website, as she calls it, sought online donations for the cause, which might easily at a glance have been mistaken by visitors as donations for the real, highly respected white ribbon movement.
There was nowhere on my site would there be any mention of donations. Why? Why would they?
Yeah, well, I mean that's her claim, and yeah, I mean, and obviously, I'll hopefully talk to Paul as well, Paul Elam. She's claiming that the funds went straight to a Voice for Men.
That's shocking. That's actually libelous.
You were saying kind of there was a lawsuit. Do you want to talk about that maybe?
Yes. Well, what happened was, I mean, I had no way of protecting myself. As I say, I'm a pensioner.
Yeah.
And what Paul did is he said, well, he would try and find a lawyer for me. I think he was mentioned in the suit, or Voice for Men in the suit as well. Okay. A lawyer for us, or for me, that would do it pro bono, or whatever. I don't know what arrangement was made, but a very, very good lawyer was found.
Okay.
And the case, this is the difficulty, because the case was heard in Geneva, I believe.
Okay.
Now, there's no way I could afford to go to Geneva to defend myself, because I believe if I could have gone, I could have made my case and we would have won, or I would have won.
Okay.
But I couldn't. So they won, and I was told I had to change the name.
Okay.
So I changed the name to honest-ribbon.
Okay.
.org. And that is that is my website now.
Yes, yeah, and because actually that Honest Ribbon rings a bell. I think I've kind of come across that.
So I want to read you, because I think this is important. I want to read you this letter.
Okay.
And this came on March the 18th, 2015. I've just been on your whiteribbon.org website, and I want to write to you to say thank you so much for all your amazing hard work and how much I admire what you're doing, and I have done for so many years. I'm in Australia, and I'm well aware of the damage to the self-esteem of young men and boys the crazy sexism of White Ribbon Campaign is doing here in Australia. I recently found out, by the way, every year now in the public school system, young boys as young as 10 have to take pledges of non-violence against women. The boys are herded into one area of the school like guilty criminals, and the girls are separated to be lectured about how potentially violent every male is on the planet, and how they have to be fearful for their personal security from every male that they know. It's obscene, and it's all because of the hysteria constantly being whipped up by the white ribbon career feminists. I'm just going to offer, if you have anything here going on in Australia, I would be happy to help you in any way I can. So that's really the first inkling that I actually got about White Ribbon Australia.
Okay.
And then after the court case, after I had to change my name, I discovered that White Ribbon had already been basically caught legally for fraudulently misusing funds.
Okay, and that's the Australian white ribbon?
Australian White Ribbon, because from their donations and the funding, ironically, is exactly what they were complaining that Paul was supposed to have done. The money they got from the White Ribbon, they collected, didn't go to refugees. It was spent on expenses, on conferences, and on staff.
Okay.
With very little left to go anywhere. And eventually it was found guilty and disbanded. So I don't know what's happened now, whether they've resurrected themselves. But as far as I know, they are still with this huge cloud hanging over them.
Okay, no, I mean, that's interesting in itself. I'm vaguely aware of kind of White Ribbon, and my sense was it was mostly based in Australia.
It's very powerful, yes.
Yeah, apparently, according to her book, it was originally launched in Canada in reaction to a specific attack or killing. But that's kind of ironic, because essentially what she is accusing Paul Elam, and by proxy you, of doing is exactly what, surprisingly enough, happened to the White Ribbon she's defending.
Yeah.
Which I have to say doesn't entirely surprise me. I suppose kind of probably the key question that I'm certainly thinking of is this: essentially, the lawsuit kind of presumably was to some extent a bit like, say, like whenever the internet was really sort of coming into fashion, people were kind of getting domain names, so the likes of kind of say Coca-Cola. If you had the Coca-Cola website, or maybe you had it but it was spelt just slightly differently, then perhaps Coca-Cola might throw their lawyers at it. And I suppose one of the outcomes of you having a similarly named website would be that people potentially going on to the Australian campaign might find you and learn about your
why they necessarily find me, because the Australian name wasn't .org.
Okay.
It would have been Australia, whatever. But yeah, it would have been .au probably.
Okay.
Might come across me, even if they did. I mean, if it wasn't what they were looking for, they'd just click off. But I can promise you, there was no request at any time for donations.
But ultimately, kind of, you had a website which was legitimately yours.
Yeah.
Which legitimately talked about your work and your, I mean, I don't want to say a very famous lady, but you've, kind of, certainly in the women's movement, you're a significant, kind of person, kind of essentially the mother of the refuge movement.
Yeah.
And it is important that your story is heard.
It's also the freedom of speech.
Absolutely.
And the freedom for us as adults to be able to disagree with each other.
Yeah.
If White Ribbon, disagreed with me, that's perfectly all right. If I disagree with them, perfectly all right. We both have our different websites, and we put on them what we believe. And I would never, ever, and I think that's important. Nobody ever asked me to put something on there that I didn't want to have put on there, because it just didn't happen. It was my website.
Yeah. Yeah. No, look, and that's, I think ultimately that's the key allegation here. That's kind of this was a hux to, by Paul to get funds and donations sort of through the white ribbon thing. So I mean, you've already clarified that's entirely false. And that's it. I mean,
and the other thing is that never at any point did anybody offer any donations anyway, whether it was up there or not.
Yeah, because presumably that wasn't really the purpose of the website. It was about
no, absolutely not.
Yeah, yeah. One of the, I suppose the key question probably then is, would Laura Bates have done enough research to have been aware that you?
Why on earth would she put herself in a position where she could be sued for libel and slander? I mean, it's slanderous to suggest somebody's collecting money.
Yeah, I mean,
why would she do that? I mean, she's not. I assume she's not an idiot. She might well be careless, though. That's probably it. Just basically bashing out a book with no research.
Yeah, kind of exploring some of the claims that she's made, because clearly some of the smears have been kind of regurgitated time and time again, and she's just clearly lifted them from the likes of kind of Vice and sort of kind of other, and the Guardian, for example. So I think in this case it strikes me that she probably kind of wouldn't have been aware that it was you. One of the reasons I was asking that was because, having read the chapter on the men's rights movement, something I find very interesting, and I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this, is she steers very widely of any female men's rights activists. She mentions a few names in passing. She literally mentions Karen Strong's name, and that's all she has to say about kind of one of the most prominent figures in the men's rights movement. She gets, at the start of the chapter, she names Mike Buchanan as the leader of the Justice for Men and Boys Party in England or the UK. Now, we could be generous and say, maybe, okay, so maybe with publishing deadlines, she wasn't aware that he had been succeeded by Elizabeth Hobson, a woman.
Yeah, he's retired.
But she does talk in detail about the George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter movement. So
what's that got to do with MRAs?
Well, I mean, essentially, what Laura Bates is doing is drawing a line, or joining dots between incels and individuals who've identified as incels who have been involved in mass shootings. She's joining dots to.
But in George Floyd's case.
Oh no! Sorry. What I mean is she's joining dots all the way from, the kind of the most extreme and very kind of what I would suggest would be kind of very rare examples, even based on some of the quotes that she's collected.
Yeah, but what she doesn't know in her research is the majority of those men have had very serious, basically incestuous relationships with their mothers. And if you look at the case of the man who shot all those young girls, all boys and girls in Norway, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And can you remember his name?
No, I can't remember his name.
Well, I do. I've got it written down. But basically, when he was 4 years old, he was in a special clinic with his mother because of her attitude towards him and her sexual advances towards him. They were worried about him.
Wow.
What happened is that they lost the papers. They were discharged, and they lost the papers, so they lost the trail.
Okay.
This again and again. Just recently here, we've had a series about the murderer Dennis Nielsen, who murdered 18 young men.
Yeah.
What didn't come out in that, and I know for a fact because the man who was on my committee of my refuge, Dr. Jim McKeith, was also on that trial, and he told me, and it's probably somewhere, but it wasn't ever used, that he was in bed with his mother until he was 15.
Okay.
Then his mother took a lover. And you find, if you trace back, a lot of cases of rape and also of serial killers.
Yeah.
So, but before you start making those statements, you have to do your research.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, like her narrative is very one-sided, and it doesn't surprise me. The George Floyd thing really kind of then links it to kind of white supremacism and the alt-right and the usual allegations that sort of the likes of kind of men's rights topics are a gateway to that sort of level of extremism.
Well, what I think about that is, if she's claiming that misogyny should be a hate crime at some point, well then obviously from what she's saying, so should misandry be a hate crime.
Oh no,
but you can't have one without the other.
You can if you're looking at the world through the lens of Laura Bates.
Yeah, well, that's why she needs to be stopped.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. She's quoted. She was saying in Women's Hour that essentially the backlash against the drive for misogyny as a hate crime is in itself an example of misogyny. It's that plain to her.
Her writing is an example of misandry.
Well, no, I mean, sort of.
That's the point. If you say one, you have to say the other, because the book she's writing, apart from anything else, there's lies.
Absolutely. I mean,
about me, I don't call myself an MRA. I don't call myself an anything. I'm a lover of God in all his aspects. Yeah. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think that her book is a hate crime. It spews hatred against men and boys.
Yeah, and people who don't fully embrace feminism ultimately is kind of the screed that kind of runs through it. It is on one level. Some of it is so pretty researched that if you're kind of aware of some of the facts, it is quite laughable, because
not laughable, it's actually hurtful.
But no, believe me. Essentially, kind of I have personally myself spent kind of most of my adult life championing equality and human rights.
Yeah.
And that's for kind of men and women, but men and women of many different kind of types of identities. Mm. And I've lived in a country which has been scarred, kind of damaged massively by terrorism. Mm. And she's essentially trying to join the dots to place people like me into the realm of terrorism. Mm. And yeah, it's kind of, if it wasn't it, that's ultimately why I knew kind of it was an important book to address. Mm. She was on Women's Hour, and I actually haven't listened. I would actually have a lot of respect for Jenny Murray, and yeah, I know
she has been an appalling proponent of anti-men attitudes, and so has Women Hour. I'm really glad that she's gone.
Well, you wait till you see who's coming after her, because I would say Emma Barton, who I would say is a much kind of blunter misandrist from that respect. What I was really meaning to say is kind of I used to listen to Women's Hour years ago, not avidly obviously, but kind of the thing that struck me was if the subject wasn't feminism, then there could be quite thorough journalism done, kind of thing. She always gives subjects that have a feminist bent a light touch. And it really was quite shocking. The interview, she didn't challenge Bates on anything. She didn't question. It was literally, she was just teeing her up for, okay, so tell me about the manosphere, right? So kind of what did you learn about such and such? And then, so what's your solution? And it's like, right,
Yes, the solution's quite simple: kill all men.
Well,
because at the end of the day, if you follow the whole of the gender feminists, we're not talking about equity feminism, which is what we all were told. It was going to be equity feminism, equality, men and women. We all agreed, men and women. And behind it was the other agenda. Now, if the gender feminist mantra, which is patriarchy, then there's no hope for men or for boys. So there's no solutions to that except some form of genocide.
Well, I mean, that's the ultimate irony about this book, because, you know, kind of clearly, I think most people reading it would recognize that there is a kind of mirror image, in the sense that she's clearly an ideologue who is in many ways very similar. She's a keyboard warrior, essentially, looking to recruit people to her cause, and she's kind of attacking the competition, would be the way I'd see it. But yes, I mean, I'm familiar with, you know, she talks about the extremes of the manosphere as such, and the manosphere is a very nebulous term, and no one is denying that there aren't horrible people out there, or there aren't, you know, kind of people who've done and said terrible things. But the point would be that she's kind of snatching at kind of, you know, little examples and using it to smear an entire sex ultimately. And I'm familiar. Are you familiar with the future is female mantra? This is quite a sort of trendy sort of chant.
I certainly heard it. I mean, I've certainly heard. You're quite right.
Yeah.
Certainly,
Yeah.
when I think of it, of course, I've heard about the future being female, and I can't think of anything more depressing than that it will end up an estrogen soup, you know, with nothing being done or created. It's ridiculous. Yeah. And majority of normal women certainly want to be allied and close to men.
Yeah.
I have not only that. I have boys. I have grandchildren. I have great grandchildren who are boys. My future is in the hands of the next generations, and I'm certainly not going to be involved in excluding boys or men. And I just think, you know, the only thing I can hope for is I think that this book won't really sell. It'll sell to the usual gender feminists who will probably just basically add it to all the books on their shelves. But the majority of human beings don't want to read books about the manosphere.
No, it won't sell in great droves. But the point is, it's published by a established, incredible publishing house, Simon and Schuster. And they, well, I don't know if they would be described as established, but they certainly seem to be, you know, kind of very big.
Which they are. They definitely are. But the fact is that, you know, they're massively out of date, because this whole discussion of hers is going to be blown out of the water within the next few years, because it will be exposed as a hypocritical movement that it always has been. Yeah.
Well, no, she, you know, I think she has very helpfully done this, because the thing about Laura Bates, because again, like, I don't know, I've come on a journey in terms of kind of really learning about the detail of feminism. So, for example, the future is female mantra that I was talking about, its origins are actually written by, I've forgotten her name now, but an academic in America whose book is still studied in gender studies. It's kind of a book called The Future is Female, and it was essentially a manifesto suggesting that kind of we should reduce the male world population to 10%. So, you know, kind of, fortunately not by genocide. She thought it would be possible over a number of generations to, you know, kind of just make choices that way. But, you know, kind of not an innocent, empowering mantra that, you know, many women who wear those T-shirts might think. Everyday sexism. Laura Bates, she started that project about sexual harassment, and I would have kind of had a fair amount of admiration and sympathy initially when I first heard about Laura Bates. Fortunately, sexual harassment is not something that I particularly have experienced much of, but her kind of project grew. And the thing that struck me about Laura Bates was any subject she was talking about, she was always claiming that, you know, kind of X hundred or thousand women were, you know, kind of writing to her about whatever particular subject she was writing about in The Guardian that week, kind of thing. And it was something it was impossible to fact check, kind of thing. You know, and I always sense that maybe there's a little bit of exaggeration at the very least. And I really do think she's exposed herself in this book.
She certainly has in our case.
Yeah.
In my case, and in Paul Elam's case.
Yeah.
She's a complete fool of herself. And she's opened herself up to getting sued.
Quite possibly. She claimed, she went on ITV and claimed that she had, over a period of 18 months, infiltrated this movement. Now, as far as I can gather...
It isn't a movement that you could infiltrate, because it doesn't... It's ridiculous.
But by my calculation, she's gone on a few kind of websites and forums and such, researched a lot of, kind of articles that have smeared, kind of already ready-baked smears, and gone to one meeting and talked to absolutely nobody kind of in the movement. The men's rights movement, which, I should stress is essentially kind of one chapter in that book, but I do feel that it's the men's rights movement, human rights movement, is the main target of this book, because she views it essentially as competition to feminism, which...
Well, I think it's just, as far as women like Laura Bates are concerned, they're usually people with personality disorders of one sort or another, and I just think that anything that she can publish, she will publish, as you say, without any sense of responsibility, and certainly in our case with absolutely no research done, and unfortunately, eventually she'll be exposed as a fraud.
Yeah, having read this book, I absolutely think she should be, certainly. And I'm sure many people have thought that before. Erin, listen, thank you very much for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.